How's it going, Star Seekers? I hope everyone's having a good weekend and welcome back to the channel. In this review we're going to be taking a look at a game called Silver Chains, a survival horror game which sees you exploring a dark and creepy mansion, solving its many puzzles and searching for clues as to what actually happened here and why the place feels so familiar. You can expect many a jump scare from the game and a good dose of problem solving. But is Silver Chains worth your time and the price tag that comes with it? In this review I aim to answer that question. So seat yourself comfortably, turn off those lights, and let's get started. So Silver Chains opens with a short introductory section which sets the scene for us. We play as a guy called Peter, who after crashing his car into a tree, finds himself before an abandoned looking mansion in the dead of night. Upon approaching the mansion in the hopes that someone inside can help him, Peter collapses and then awakens in one of the mansion's many bedrooms, and it's within this mansion that the rest of the game takes place. Now the story of Silver Chains is drip fed to you as you progress through the game and find various clues, and while there is a bit of dialogue to be found in the game, the majority of its storyline is told in the form of written notes. While we do eventually discover the reason Peter is in the mansion and he slowly regains long suppressed memories, I have to say that the game's storyline is a little cliché and leaves a few things left unexplained, like how he even ended up going to the mansion in the first place, or why this crazy crone is triggered by a spot of Moonlight Sonata on the piano. Now as you get to working your way through the game, you'll quickly realise that the lighting is less than adequate, and while the game is supposed to be quite dark to make things more tense and atmospheric, a lot of times important events are missed due to things being way too dark, so you're going to want to bump that brightness up to max. Doing so does help somewhat, especially after you find a lamp to light your way, but about halfway into the game you acquire a monocle, which is used to find symbols throughout the rest of the game, and when using said monocle, ironically I literally couldn't see anything, which does prove problematic on several occasions. Now despite it being a survival horror game, gameplay in Silver Chains is primarily focused around exploring the mansion, puzzle solving and finding objects or notes which open up new areas for you to search for clues within to guide you to your next objective. Progression through the game is pretty linear, with one objective generally leading to the next, and you'll be travelling back and forth through the mansion and returning to previously locked areas after finding items to open the way. While it's not overly large, most of the mansion features the same rundown appearance, which can make it a little difficult to find your way back to particular locations, and this is mainly due to the fact that there's no map to help you find your way. After getting your hands on the monocle, the developers do use the symbols seen through it to guide you towards your next objective, and while you can see these symbols through walls, it doesn't really help with actually getting to them. Now when it comes to the game's puzzle solving, aside from finding clues and working out where to go next, many of the game's puzzles involve you interacting with objects such as rotating a lantern in a specific direction or pressing a correct sequence of buttons, and to say things are kept relatively simple is a little bit of an understatement. The clues given to you for puzzles are generally very specific, allowing you to solve them with very little effort, and I personally felt the most challenging aspect was actually working my way to each puzzle. The game does have an inventory system in which to store your items and a journal to keep your notes in, but aside from checking out items in the inventory for extra clues, you actually don't really use these systems much at all. So the game's location and atmosphere are somewhat reminiscent of games such as Layers of Fear or Resident Evil 7. As you work your way from room to room, you'll experience unsettling supernatural events which attempt to keep things tense, and these include the old bathtub hand grab gag, creepy dead children to chase around, and everyone's favourite toy dolls of babies with various limbs amputated suspended by strings from the ceiling. While the game at times does attempt to be subtle with its approach to horror, I found it primarily relied on jump scares, and for me the majority of them were expected. Despite me having my torch at hand and the brightness maxed, I also found that some of them were hard to even see. Now in addition to these, you also have several confrontations with a gaunt looking monster who walks across walls and chases you down, snapping your neck if she catches you. There's no combat in the game, so you just have to run away and hide in conveniently placed closets until she goes away, which in itself isn't anything new, and as expected, if she spots you entering them, she'll just whip open the doors and you're dead meat. Unlike enemies such as the Nemesis in Resident Evil, who stalks you around the whole level and appears at random, these events are actually scripted, and most of the closets are actually in the same room in which they occur, so they didn't really add much to the game's scare factor. Overall, I can't say that Silver Chains is really that scary, but if you're of a nervous disposition, you'll likely still get a few frights out of it. Now, I don't want to cover any more details of the game to avoid spoilers with both its scares and puzzles, so I'll just say that Silver Chains is a decent horror game, though it doesn't do much to stand out amongst other similar games in the genre. Story-wise, there's enough here to justify your actions and explain the plot thoroughly enough for you to understand it, but again there's not much left open to interpretation, and I saw a lot of the plot twists coming a mile off. Now when it comes to the game's graphics, you won't be surprised to find out that the Nintendo Switch version of the game has took a major hit in terms of visual fidelity. You'll notice that throughout the game most of the texture resolutions are of very low quality, and the eShop images have been selected with care. The darkness of the game does somewhat mask these issues, but surprisingly enough there were a few occasions when I experienced frame rate drops. It's also worth noting that I had a few issues interacting with certain objects, with the prompts for them not appearing until I was right next to them, and sometimes I had to move backwards and forwards just to get them to appear. Now audio wise, I actually felt the developers did a good job with the ambient sound effects and shrill jumpscare violin hits, and you get your standard horror music which pipes up whenever things get a bit spooky, which does add to the overall creepy atmosphere. When it comes to the content that the game has to offer, for your first playthrough, Silver Chains will likely take around 3 to 4 hours to complete, so it is a little on the short side, and this amount of content may not be enough to justify the game's price for some people. For me personally, Silver Chains didn't quite hit the mark with either its horror or puzzle elements. I felt that both of them were too straightforward and that they'd been done many times before. So now let's get on to rating the game. Now I give games a rating out of 5 stars, and this is based on my own personal opinion on the quality and quantity of a title's gameplay and whether I think it offers value for money to potential buyers. For a rating, I'm going to be giving Silver Chains 2 out of 5 stars. Now I'm a huge fan of both horror and puzzle games, but for me Silver Chains didn't quite scratch those itches. I felt the developers played it a little safe with this one and didn't get too adventurous with the game's mechanics, and while it's by no means a bad game, it's not one that I'm likely to remember in a few years time or replay anytime soon. You can get Silver Chains from the UK Switch eShop, where it's usually priced at £19.99. or from the US eShop, where it's usually priced at $24.99. Alternatively, the game's also available on Xbox, PlayStation and Steam. And that just about does it for this review of Silver Chains. Don't forget to hit that like button if it helped you out, let me know your thoughts on it in the comments section below, and go ahead and subscribe to the channel to be notified of new reviews that I publish every few days. For now though, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.